This is Right to Life Radio. And now, here's your host, John Gerardi.
Back with Right to Life Radio. All right, Jonathan. So the concept of Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, the extremely importance overrated series of policy proposals from the Heritage Foundation that I feel sort of the Trump administration unwisely has completely thrown under the bus and thrown into the garbage bin, which had at least one advantage. It was a very detailed set of policy proposals, and everything it suggested about the abortion issue was great. Now, this is the problem I think as pro-lifers we see going into the Harris-Trump matchup is obviously we know what Harris will do on the abortion issue. And I'm not arguing, or before someone starts saying, oh, how come you're criticizing Trump? Harris is so much worse. Harris is going to, I concede that on the abortion issue, Harris's positions are clearly, unequivocally terrible. Okay? Her position on what she wants to do as far as court packing, which we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show, what she wants to do as far as passing nationwide legislation to enact legal abortion, all this stuff, all very bad, very, very bad. The problem is that with the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, not committing to anything about the abortion pill, mischaracterizing the Supreme Court's decision on the abortion pill, getting rid of all the pro-life language from the platform, and then just being very mum about anything relating to abortion. Are they going to do all the same things they did in the first Trump administration with regards to abortion? If so, that would be great. Let's hear it. Are they going to do some of the things? Are they going to do none of the things? Are they going to take a posture of, well, abortion is a state issue, so we're just not going to do anything for things that are, as I've explained, things that are inextricably federal? What is going to happen? I think the problem is, yes, I concede that the Harris administration would be worse because nothing could be worse than the kinds of things Harris is proposing. But I also don't know. I don't know what the Trump administration is going to do because they haven't committed to anything. And before you tell me, well, look at all the amazing things they did in 2017 to 2021. Okay, I concede. They did a lot of amazing things in 2017 and 2021. Right. I have yet to hear or see or read any commitment from President Trump that he's going to do all that stuff again. And that's my now
Your
maybe
beef?
That's my beef. Now, JD Vance has asked during a recent prayer breakfast type event, he said, hey, you social conservatives, you're always going to have a seat at the table. I just want you to put your faith in, Trump here, and that he's going to do the right thing. Give us some grace that we're going to do the right thing here. I can understand a pro-lifer making the reasonable judgment that they're going to do all the right things when they get in office. They're not going to talk about it or highlight it right now because it's unpopular, but when they get in office, they're going to do it. That you trust that Trump did this stuff in his first term, he's going to do it again in his second term. That J.D. Vance is super pro-life and that he's telling us to trust. Okay. Maybe that's a fair judgment. I'm just saying that it's a leap of faith. And I don't like making leaps of faith trusting in the words of human beings.
Sure.
Other than the second person of the Trinity.
Yeah, that's fair.
Who assumed a human nature. So short of that, I'm big on divine faith. Totally down with that. Totally down on divine faith, basing it on the word of God Almighty, who can neither deceive nor be deceived.
I think
but not human beings.
Am I correct that it would be fair to paraphrase the?
It's the Reagan quote.
Yes.
Trust but verify.
Bingo. You literally read my mind. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I think that the Trump administration, as you said, did a lot of wonderful things. And I don't think we need to rehash that we are grateful for many of those things.
Yeah.
But it's also true, John. I just need to say, it's not just that pro-lifers are being whiny and cranky. If you look at what happened with the party platform, which I don't know that we've even had much of a time to talk a whole lot about the party platform.
I talked about it quite a bit, but yeah.
I'll give you another example.
Yeah.
Essentially, they removed almost anything about the Second Amendment from the party platform.
They don't have anything about the Second Amendment. They don't. Yeah.
If you are not a whiny social conservative, I'm using, for those of you listening, I'm using scare quotes because I think sometimes social conservatives, especially pro-lifers, sometimes get maligned as, just shut up and take what we give you.
Stop whining. Gosh. Yeah.
The fact that the
Second Amendment isn't even,
yes.
which has been a major Republican priority for forever.
For decades. And John, I would argue to say that I think there are times, I'm going to make a very controversial little aside here, John.
All right.
I look at what some of my conservative friends in other states complain about when it comes to the Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. And they say, oh my gosh, can you believe that there is a proposal for universal background checks that they're trying to pass in the state, federally.
Yeah.
And we're going to, the NRA,
we're going to fight this tooth and nail.
I'm like, well, you know what state does have universal background checks? Is California.
Yeah.
Oh, that horrible, evil, awful state. I'll just say, for everybody who's listening, I own multiple firearms.
It's not that hard. It's not that
I
huge
own
of a restriction.
A handgun, a shotgun, a rifle.
Yeah.
And, by the way, I own not one, but 2 AR-15s.
There you go. Yeah.
Guess what? I was able,
to
as
do
a
this.
white male, a white Christian male, a white Christian cisgender heterosexual male, to pass a background check in California. So my point being on all of this is that there are certainly some things where you could look at and you can say, oh, well, I think that there could be an opportunity for compromise among the pro Second Amendment community, that I think in some cases, if conservatives nationally assented to some minor safeguards regarding firearms, I think it would probably actually improve our standing with certain segments of the population.
Possibly, yeah. And regardless, though, the idea that we need to shut up.
Exactly.
The idea that we need to shut up when, unlike in 2016, where there were clear commitments made in the platform, clear commitments that we were going to pursue this policy, this policy, this policy, this policy, and a full list of potential Supreme Court picks. And we haven't gotten any of those things this year.
And this is my point on that, John, that it feels like it's always the social conservatives that are being asked to compromise, to water down their positions, to shut up. It's never the tax cut people.
It's never the tax cut
It's
people.
never the Second Amendment people. It's
always us. Yeah. All right, when we return, Kamala Harris's proposed court packing. We'll deal with that next. This is Right to Life Radio. Back with Right to Life Radio. All right, Jonathan, let's dig into this. Jonathan Keller here with us, as always, here on Right to Life Radio, a production, as always, of Right to Life of Central California, rtlcc.org. I want to talk about court packing and the proposal belatedly coming from President Biden. I think he only was sort of rolling this out sort of in the last days of the Biden campaign as a way to kind of shore up support from the left, as it was clear that Biden was being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed out of the campaign. Biden has proposed a series of reforms for the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court is in crisis, meaning that the media worked hand in hand with liberal activists to publish a bunch of stories that had a lot of smoke and no fire about alleged ethical improprieties on the part of the Supreme Court, which were really not ethical violations at all, but they created such a fog of news to sort of create some impression that the Supreme Court was, it's a disaster, and it needs to be reformed.
Well, let's also be clear, John, that most of these concerns about ethical lapses or things have only arisen despite them being around, like Clarence Thomas, for example, who has been on the court for 30-plus years. Didn't care about those as much when Thomas was in the minority.
Very consistently,
You had Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the court. You had Anthony Kennedy on the court. You had Sandra Day O'Connor on the court.
Right.
Nobody cared as much about that. It's only now that the court has started to rule in ways that the left does not like, that they're pulling out the big guns, figuratively speaking.
Yeah. So basically, now that there's a 6-3 Republican majority of appointees on the Supreme Court, all of a sudden there's a crisis at the Supreme Court. It needs desperate reform. Oh, it needs reform so badly. And so President Biden has introduced and Kamala Harris has endorsed a series of reforms for the Supreme Court. So one reform is a proposed amendment to the Constitution to limit the scope of presidential immunity, which, not really touching too much on the life issue there, sort of in response to the recent Supreme Court case about presidential executive immunity. Another proposal for an ethics code for the Supreme Court. I think that's questionable. I think there are some problems there with, which we'll talk about it a little bit, about basically for Congress to pass a law giving the Supreme Court an ethics code could result in some real problems with separation of powers, who actually can enforce that. If the question gets appealed to the courts, how does the court decide? It has to be, I think, something that's internally put upon the court by itself, just from a separation of powers perspective. But most controversially is the Biden proposal to impose term limits on Supreme Court justices, and basically a whole new system for appointing Supreme Court justices. Basically, Supreme Court justices would get an 18-year term of office, and every 2 years, a new vacancy would come to be on the court, meaning every president would get an opportunity to replace 2 Supreme Court justices. And presumably, this would retroactively apply to all the justices who have been on the court for 18 plus years. And oh, what a coincidence. There are 3 such justices, and all 3 of them are Republican appointees. Shocking. Clarence Thomas, John Roberts, and Sam Alito. 2 of the 5 who voted to overturn Roe versus Wade. Shockingly. So, I want to talk about this. Obviously, this would have an impact on the abortion issue, because the only reason they're doing that, I think there's the underlying and then the immediate reason. The underlying reason why they're doing this is because it's the first time in really since the 1930s that liberals have not fully and completely controlled the United States Supreme Court. And I think it's hard for people to understand just how much that freaks out liberals, that they've been able just to rely on the Supreme Court as being their sort of fail-safe mechanism. Well, we can't pass gay marriage through democratic means, so what do? We just have the Supreme Court declare that gay marriage is hidden in the Constitution somewhere. Now there's legal gay marriage for all the United States. They didn't even have to have any fight to legalize abortion, because in 1973 the court, just by fiat, declared it to be so. The Constitution, you all didn't know this, but the Constitution protects the right to legal abortion. Now, that underlying fact has enraged the left, but the immediate reason is the overturning of Roe.
Right.
The overturning of Roe v. Wade, liberals view this as the worst disaster to come from the Supreme Court since
Korematsu
or Plessy Ferguson. Yeah, it's the worst Supreme Court decision of all time. That is how they view Dobbs. That it is the greatest disaster. That it stripped away this constitutional right that we can't actually find anywhere in the Constitution or anywhere in American history or legal tradition. But this terror that stripped away this constitutional right. How dare they? So basically, they want to reinstitute what they view as the maybe not God, but nature, Gaia given norm of, Dionysus given whatever they were worshiping at the Paris Olympics.
That's right.
The norm, that the normal posture of the universe, which is that abortion should be legal in all 50 states for any reason. And by hook or by crook, they are going to accomplish that, whether that's through a whole system to repack the United States Supreme Court in the way that they want.
John,
to
we
balance.
need to rebalance.
We
the
need to
Supreme
balance
Court.
the Supreme
That's right.
Court. Yes.
Balance is what's important.
Because the Republicans, they were packing the court, which is hilarious. It's like, basically, they're saying Donald Trump aggressively filling judicial vacancies. They call that packing the court, which is not what it was. Packing the court means creating new seats, change the ideological outcome of the court because you don't like the results they're getting. It doesn't mean like filling new vacancies that happen to come about. The term court packing is a specific term of art that means something within American history and American legal history specifically.
Going back to FDR.
Going back to FDR. So in 1936, FDR was getting really mad that the Supreme Court kept blocking a bunch of his New Deal legislation. So he wins the election in 1936. Democrats win massive majorities in the House and the Senate. FDR proposes this thing, hey, if you're over the age of 70, you can stay on the Supreme Court, but the president has the right to appoint someone else. So that would have given him the right automatically to appoint 6 new Supreme Court justices because there were 6 guys over the age of 70. So Biden, understandably, Biden did not take a age-based approach to the court. Would have been pretty silly for Biden to say, if you're over the age of 70, you need to get off that
right.
court. Unlike me.
If you are over 81 and a half.
It's impossible for an 82-year-old, for an 82 years and 6-month-old to be working in government. So Biden is doing a similar thing. He's just structuring it around like years of service. Now, will this actually pass? I don't think Biden proposed this with any thought that it can actually happen right now, certainly. You would need a majority in the House, a majority in the Senate to accomplish how Biden is, picturing this, and Republicans have a majority in the House. So it's not going to happen. You would also have to eliminate the filibuster rule in the Senate in order to do that. So basically in the U.S. Senate, for most pieces of legislation, you need actually more than a simple majority. You need 60 of the 100 votes in order to advance most different kinds of legislation. There's no way that they're going to get 10 Republicans to go, or 9 Republicans right now, I guess, to go along with that.
No chance.
No chance of that. But if you have the majority in the Senate, you can change the Senate rules. Mm-hmm. And they might just decide, well, this is so, balancing the court is so important that we need to blah, 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 blah. Now, here's the other big problem with it, though. The number of justices on the Supreme Court is not set in the Constitution. The Constitution does not say you have to have 9 justices. And the number of justices on the Supreme Court has changed over the course of American history per laws that were passed by Congress, normal laws, majority in the House, majority in the Senate, and the president signs them. Now, we've been stuck at 9 justices since about, I believe it was 1870, or around there, right after the Civil War, and we've had 9 justices ever since. The problem is, though, that what Biden's proposing is altering the length of service on the Supreme Court, not changing the number, but altering the length of service on the court from a lifetime appointment to 18 years. The length of appointment of Supreme Court justices is specified by the Constitution in Article 3, where it says that justices appointed to the Supreme Court or to any inferior courts set up by Congress, they will serve in good behavior. That's the actual term of art that's used in the Constitution. Good behavior. Meaning, as long as you're behaving good, you're there. Your job is secure. It's so, and that's always been understood and as a lifetime appointment.
But John, clearly, good behavior means ruling the way the Democrats want.
So exactly. Yeah, it's very bad behavior. Now, although in fairness, the good behavior came to be understood in conjunction with principles about using the powers of impeachment and removal. So it's not just the president who can be impeached and removed. Federal judges can also be impeached and removed through a similar process to that can be applied against the president or against other officials. You would need a majority in the House to impeach a Supreme Court justice and a 2/3 majority in the Senate to remove a Supreme Court justice. So the provision in Article 3 saying that you serve in good behavior, there is that sort of caveat there is that sort of check on judicial misconduct that, hey, you can get impeached and removed. And while we've never had a Supreme Court justice impeached or removed, I believe there have been federal district court judges. There have been inferior court judges who have been impeached and removed. And I think it's often been for stuff like, accepting bribes or, things of that sort. So the president, so here's the problem. You can't pass a law like this limiting Supreme Court terms through a normal law passed by the House and the Senate and signed by the president. Now, Biden's proposed this sort of cockamamie theory that I think he cooked up with Lawrence Tribe, who's a law professor at Harvard, a retired law professor at Harvard. So, well, they can serve for 18 years on the Supreme Court, but then they can go down to one of the inferior courts. They can go down to a circuit court.
Lawrence Tribe, to paraphrase President Trump, is post-Trump administration. He was, I think, a somewhat respected constitutional scholar.
Yeah. He was,
and now he has transitioned into a very stable genius.
Yeah, exactly.
With the level of Trump derangement syndrome he has.
Yeah, exactly. All right, when we return, we'll talk more about this and how this would be hugely destabilizing for the country. Next on Right to Life Radio. Back with Right to Life Radio, we're talking about the Biden-Harris plan for imposing term limits on the Supreme Court. I think it's unconstitutional. I think it would be a massive disruption to our whole constitutional order, and I think the Democrats are only doing it because they're mad Roe v. Wade was overturned. Jonathan had one quick thought here about this proposal.
So very quick, there have been 14 federal judges who have been impeached over the course of American history on charges ranging from drunkenness on the bench to accepting bribes.
Yeah.
The first impeachment was 1803. Most recent was 2010. And 8 of the jurists were convicted by the Senate and removed from office, and 3 were acquitted and 3 resigned. And then, John, to your point, only one Supreme Court justice has been threatened with impeachment, and he resigned under the threat of impeachment, which was 1969, Abe Fortas.
Right. So, and that's the point here is the left wants to completely restructure the Supreme Court purely because they want different outcomes.
Yep.
They are so furious that Roe v. Wade was overturned that they want to restructure this whole thing, kick John Roberts, Sam Alito, and Clarence Thomas out in one fell swoop, which, frankly, I think that would cause a constitutional crisis because I don't think they would recognize the legitimacy of it. And I think you'd have to, arrest Clarence Thomas and drag him out of his office. I just think it's a hugely destructive thing. And the only reason they're doing it, or the main reason anyway, is because they're mad that Roe was overturned. That will do it for Right to Life Radio. See y'all next time on Power Talk.